Digging into the future. Today we've got William Smales joining us here, the Chief Investment Officer of Morrison, and from a country that I absolutely love. He's a Kiwi or a New Zealander, and he's been transplanted to New York, where he's been become one of the icons of the sort of digital infrastructure space. So, William, welcome to Digging into the Future.
Thanks for having me.
And listen, we're all trying to kind of unpack what's going on in the world right now, right? How do you see the investment horizon as you sort of, there's a lot of changes in the U.S. government coming on. I mean, how are you seeing the markets, and what are the key themes you think are coming along in the new world?
It's a pretty exciting time. I mean, for me, the thing I'm thinking about most is, I've got this image of a smooth pond, and if that smooth pond is the digital ecosystem, someone dropped a massive rock in the middle and it hit our data center infrastructure assets around the world. So the AI is the rock, and it's sort of the first impact I think has been felt in those data center assets. The question for me is, it's going to create a massive ripple out from that. I'm not sure how far and wide and how deep and broad that ripple will be, but that's the bit that's really interesting to me.
Yeah, no, I think it's, and I think it actually, it's funny because this conference is almost a bellwether, because it's every year you sort of look at these things, and I think last year it was kind of like this little topic off to the side, and now, boom, it's dead center, right? It's driving a lot of the thoughts in some of the biggest tech companies, and all of a sudden also the governments are much more involved. I mean, you start thinking about. I don't know whether you've seen some of these papers. There's an interesting chart that came out that showed countries that you could send GPUs to and countries you're not allowed to send GPUs to, and it was a very small list on that list. And then there was a lot of countries that a lot of people have data centers and stuff, and they're saying, hey, Americans can't do AI in those countries. So I mean, is that obviously it's got to change? It is one of those ripples, right?
Yeah.
I think.
I think the idea that the benefits of AI and the investment into AI is not going to be shared equally around the world is really, really important thing to recognize. I think in a US context, you've seen similar numbers to me, as much as 50% of the global data center investment is happening here in the US. I suspect actually the number could be larger than that. That's an incredible opportunity for the United States in terms of the ecosystem that will build, the businesses that will innovate around that infrastructure, and then ultimately the productivity gains that will sweep through the country as a result. So that's great for the US. The question is, what's happening in the rest of the world, and how do you catch up, particularly when there's concern around things like, where do those GPUs live? That's sort of really a tip of the spear type question. The broader implications are, what does that mean for the overall health of the AI ecosystem?
Yeah, no, it's the first time that the internet isn't sort of ubiquitous across the world, right? It's the first time they said, okay, no, we're going to play in only these places and not in these places.
Yeah.
Do you think that impacts, or do you think there'll be a ripple effect? I mean, you think about it as an investor. If you take out the top 7 tech companies, which are all American, right? They represent 65% of the market capitalization, right? And they've only gotten bigger. The interesting thing is they haven't really changed much in 10 years, right?
Yeah.
I mean, does that mean that, and they do that by essentially being global companies, right? Does that impact them as global companies because you think there'll be reactions to this, or do you think it'll be? It's interesting. I don't know whether. Do you think it's going to be a leadership, the United States leading the way in this area and sort of these companies being at the front, or do you think it's going to be contention?
I think it's that. I think the one thing we don't probably, sitting here today, based in New York with a global investment firm, we're not present in China. I do not have a feel for the innovation, the infrastructure that's being built there. So at the moment, I would say absolutely, US is a huge leader in the space, but we probably have a bit of a blind spot as to what's emerging in China and how that will challenge the US. And look, the other interesting thing here is the reason why the US will probably do so well is we're still not sure what the overall revenue models are for AI.
Yeah.
So if you sort of step back and think, I'm one of the hyperscalers sitting in a world where I know I've got to spend a lot of money on infrastructure. I'm still not really sure about the ultimate business models and my payback on that infrastructure. Do you then take another risk around deploying in regions that aren't your home region? I don't think you do. I think given that uncertainty, you'll tend to bias to very established regions where you know that you've got the best view of the demand and the business models.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting perspective because that's almost exactly how the internet actually evolved too, right? It started in the United States and then sort of went offshore, right? And it was in the beginning it was largely a U.S.-based model that everyone played around with and tinkered with, and then boom, it went in all directions. No, I never thought of it, but to sort of go back to 2000 and think about how the steps were then, how the internet evolved. It may be exactly how AI will evolve because you do need speculative capital, right? I mean, to do this. I mean, it's whether it be the OTT guys or venture capital, et cetera. You do need capital doesn't have a very clear vision, right? I mean,
and you could be something. Often when there's talk of an AI bubble, people sort of refer back to the early 2000s. But I think you're onto something too. If you think about the way the internet evolved with the US at its heart, maybe we should also be looking back to that period and say, what lessons could we learn around government and investors working together in other regions to accelerate the development of the internet back then? Like, what worked well, what did not work well, and what can we do today? Because I think it has to be a collaboration between private capital like Morrison and governments. And governments can either do that by underwriting risk for private capital, but more importantly, probably, they can just make the regulatory landscape really, really clear.
Yeah.
And really conducive to investment.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, and the thing we're not saying is that, what happened after 2000, right? I mean, it did go through a bit of a train wreck before it, so it went up, came down pretty hard, and then and I think a lot of us forget about that, right? I mean, they forget that, I forget how many billions of dollars of value was destroyed in a very, very short period of time. And then you had Google and all these guys sort of kind of came back into the frame, and then it grew, and it was probably one of the healthiest expansions we've ever seen. But you think about it, it was a mess.
Yeah, and there's bound to be some sort of carnage in and around the sector, of course. I think what's great this time around is the role Microsoft, Amazon, Meta, Google are playing in the developments. Like, they are very high grade, high quality, well managed businesses, and they're sort of playing the lead role of driving investment in the sector, and I think that's incredibly important. There's also other things we should worry about, having such big folks out there in the industry. But overall, I think that's a net positive this time around, that we might not see that sort of boom and bust cycle.
Right, because back then there was no revenue, right? And it was a PowerPoint.
That's right. Like, if you think of Microsoft today, the traditional cloud business is incredibly strong. Right? Yeah. That's driving revenues through the business. It's underpinned by very strong revenue streams.
So maybe let's backtrack a little bit. So Morrison, obviously you're a New Zealand fund. Probably should have started this way, but what do you invest? Are you just tech, or do you invest in other? Are you what does your fund do? What's your day job look like when you leave these beautiful Hawaii?
Yeah. So Morrison today is a global infrastructure investment manager. So we're looking around the globe, and we're putting capital to work in what we call ideas that matter. And for Morrison, the ideas that matter are ideas that are in those big trends. So digital infrastructure is one of our big trends. We also have 4 other big trends we're investing behind. But we find those big trends, and then we look for the businesses that have the infrastructure characteristics. Because remember, if you're asking someone to invest in infrastructure, you're not looking for ups and downs in terms of returns. You're looking for very steady, long-term, safe returns. So if you think about the pension plans around the world, the sovereign wealth funds, they come to Morrison because they're looking for that kind of profile of investment. So that's what we're doing. And look, the Kiwi thing, the New Zealand thing, grew up in New Zealand. Morrison was founded, nearly over 35 years ago in New Zealand. But today, I'm based in New York. We've got teams in London. We've got teams in Singapore. We've got teams in New York. A big presence in Australia. So we're truly global now, but we haven't forgotten our Kiwi roots.
No, it's more just my affection for the country that always I always like to harp on the fact that you're a very, very successful Kiwi business, right? Yeah. And it's for a small country of 4 to 5 million people, it's nice to have a major fund that's punching with the other funds around the world, and you don't have a big home base to work out of, right?
No,
I mean, it's a
country of 5 million people. not known for producing large investment managers or financial services firms. But do you know what, Bill? Like, one of the things about growing up in a small town in a small country is I think it does impact the way you do business.
Yeah.
Like, if anybody who's grown up in a small town knows that you bump into everybody every day.
Yep.
So if you're doing business with that person, you do it on the basis that you're going to see them tomorrow, next week, next year, and in 10 years' time. And I think that dictates a little bit about the way you behave. And today, sitting in the US, a very, very big market, New York, a very big city within that market, I still behave as though every person I'm going to meet, I'm going to do business with them again. And I hope in the long term that's the right way to do it.
No, I think it's as a small town guy myself, and also a small Kiwi guy spending a lot of time in New Zealand, I agree with you. I think it's I think building those types of relationships and also realizing that you can't. It's not about one deal in this world. It's about continually working together. And on that theme, I think one of the biggest problems that you addressed it a little bit earlier, but obviously China's the 200-pound gorilla right now, and not in just to set the stage. From our perspective, I think at PTC, we've always been believers in that you have to be collaborative. And the Chinese have been probably one of the biggest partners in the Pacific digital infrastructure space for decades, right? And we've all collaborated together. When there's been a crisis, we've all worked together, and we've always thought of things together. So it is even harder for me sitting here to be talking about the fact that all of a sudden there's a black box over there that's doing AI that nobody knows about, because it wasn't like this 10 years ago. And I know it must be hard for you as an investment professional, because sometimes your assets that you're trying to acquire may have pieces into that world and then pieces outside that world. And how do you navigate it? Because it really is people are trying to make it into a black and white world when it really isn't black and white. Right?
I mean, that's why it's nice being here at PTC, because you realize that there is a rich history of collaboration between nations to implement communications infrastructure around the globe. The fact that you can communicate around the globe requires countries to cooperate. You need to land cables on each other's shores. And like you say, in times of crisis and natural disaster, there's a rich history of countries really pitching in to help each other out. So I think we should try and remember that. We should try and package that and sort of draw on that in this next phase, where we're probably entering a period of just heightened sort of national concerns around the future. And I think it's up to folks like yourself, who've seen the collaboration in the past, to just keep talking about it. So we don't forget that we're actually all working to a common objective, which is safety, security, and prosperity in the planet, and beyond national borders.
So tell me, one of the interesting things, because digital infrastructure, and it's interesting to talk to these all the folks in it. The new pillar, because it used to be like towers, data centers, fiber, right?
Yeah.
Well, electricity is now becoming another pillar, right? I mean, and how do you see that? Do you think it's going to be the next leg of this whole thing, which is how do I get innovative power solutions to solve all this? And do you think there'll be chips as number 5, right? I mean, do you think there could be 5 pillars to the whole digital infrastructure? I mean, and it's interesting because you do see that those 2 dimensions have now they are the pointy end of the sword, right? Like there's other 3 things follow those 2, right? Which is, they used to be in the background.
Yeah. And look, Morrison invested in its first wind farm in the late 90s. So we've been doing this a long time, and today we manage one of the largest developers of utility scale solar, wind, and storage here in the US. So we've had a really, really good view of what's happening in that sector. And about 5 years ago, we started to see that our power purchasing agreements, these PPAs, were starting to be contracted with Microsoft, Google, Meta. And that was the first sign, I think, that these 2 sectors were moving closer and closer together. And to your point, right today they're smushed together with electricity networks in the middle there trying to facilitate the counterparties. What's so exciting though is the energy sector is undergoing a wave of innovation like we haven't seen before. To your point about microgrids, distributed generation. How do we get nuclear, whether it's small modular reactors or something even smaller, into the grid? How do we deploy tactically gas generation to meet the energy demand? Like it's suddenly it's a really exciting, innovative sector.
And it used to be a fairly boring industry, right?
And the other thing pushing sort of the digital world and the power world together is, a lot of that increased power demand is coming from our data centers.
Yeah.
So if you're a power investor, you actually have to understand what's going on over there, and vice versa.
Yeah.
So it's a really nice moment for firms who do both, and luckily we do both, that you can bring the capabilities together, and you can have someone who's invested and sat on the board of a large electricity utility, so understands about building high voltage transmission up and down a country. You can get someone who's invested in data centers and understand how the power demands are going up and what's happening there. And you've got someone who just practically knows how to build a wind farm or get solar deployed in ERCOT. And bringing all those people together, I think that's where the magic will happen.
Yeah, no, it is probably one of the more interesting things, and as you start envisioning what the future of the world looks like, and the interesting thing also is that you think about nuclear power. Nuclear power is agnostic to where you put it, right? A nuclear power plant can be put on any piece of land in the world.
Yeah.
Right. So you all of a sudden, country A that's got 10,000 people can be producing 5 gigawatts of power and running an AI model, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And it can be anywhere.
Anywhere. And it can be anywhere. And obviously you got to consume that power, but you're right. If you're running AI models right next to your generation, you simply got to have a subsea cable, and then you're solved. I mean, the other idea where I thought you were going there is there is a whole wave of investment around electricity transmission networks and cables subsea.
Yep.
Right. So increasingly, generation and energy networks will become more and more interconnected, much like we've seen the world's optical networks become interconnected. And I think that's a huge investment opportunity, because the more we can make these energy networks interconnected, the more resilient they become, the more you can manage against resource risk or poor weather or adverse weather events or technology risk. You may have a deployment of solar in one region, you may have a very windy region in another, you may have access to nuclear in another. So the idea that all those networks can be interconnected, that again,
I think
will be incredible.
Which is amazing, because it is still one of the big gating factors, is the fact that you can't really move power that far, right? Like
without a lot of loss.
Yeah, you can't move it like intercontinental. Like you can, the great thing is networks. You can be sitting in New York and you can communicate with London with a fiber optic cable very efficiently, right? But you can't. If you wanted to take 3 gigawatts in say Iceland, for example, and move it from Iceland to Dublin, you can't do it.
You can't do it. But there are innovations happening there, and so there's pretty exciting developments, because the idea that you can have geothermal in Iceland and bring it to Europe, or you can have massive solar installations in Morocco or other parts of North Africa and bring it up to Europe. I think we're at the verge where the technological improvements around long distance transmission, i.e. managing transmission loss, are starting to give us hope that those projects will start to eventuate.
And one of the things I love, and I'd be interested to get your perspective, is the U.S. capital markets have evolved so much that you can actually have a lot of capital chasing great ideas now. And it's not just venture capital now, it's private equity, it's digital infrastructure, and funds like yourselves can have a piece of this, to help drive, because these things just require money in many ways to fund the R&D and
You're dead right. Effective capital markets, supplying the capital for the investment is the key, and it will be a collaboration between folks like Morrison who invest in infrastructure. It will be the PE players doing it. It will be the listed markets who will be taking some of these large assets that have grown over the years, particularly data center assets. And then obviously, if you think about how sophisticated debt capital markets have become, that's all working together to create what I think is actually a really exciting period of investment. Like it has been quite a while since we've seen all the indicators suggesting that this is a really positive investment time, but we're starting to see all the arrows sort of start to point in the right direction.
It's great to have you, and always a great perspective. You're right at the edge of some of the cool stuff that's going on, so it's really, really great to have you here. So thanks again for joining us.
Thanks for having me.